It's so good to have you back. I wanted, I've been planning on this for a while, to have you back to speak about the issues of asylum and, I guess, refugee resettlement, because of everyone out there, I think you speak the most clearly and definitively about this subject. And only when I started watching what you were saying about it did I fully come into an understanding. Well, I want more understanding from you today, and I want everybody else to get what I've gotten so far. So my first question to you is, what is the difference between a refugee and an asylee? This is the first thing I've learned.
Basically, geography. That's the difference. In other words, the law uses the same yardstick to decide whether you're a refugee or asylee. In other words, you have been persecuted or have a well-founded fear of persecution based on one of 5 criteria. Political opinion, nationality, race, religion, or, and here's the kicker, membership in a particular social group, which means anything an activist judge wants it to mean, really. But the difference is that a refugee is someone abroad that we resettle here, and we choose to do it. It's a sovereign act of the government. The UN kind of decides, okay, well, these people are refugees, and then we decide, okay, who warrants resettlement in the United States. And I think we do that badly, and there's all kinds of stuff to talk about there, but we decide we pick somebody up from abroad, he's a refugee, and bring him here. Asylum, an asylee, which is sort of a, awkward term, but it's the parallel to a refugee, is someone who's is supposedly measured by the same yardstick, the persecution, but they're here already. They're already in the United States. And that is not a sovereign act of the United States, because that's the foreigner saying, I am here and you have to let me stay. It's a kind of surrender of sovereignty. Whereas refugee resettlement is an act. It's a sovereign act. We can do it well. We can do it badly. We can let in too many or too few, all of that, but it's up to us to decide. Asylum essentially is for the foreigner decides whether he's going to stay or not. It's it's the kind of thing that you can see why after World War II, they created this legal structure. But at the time, it was limited really to a handful of people fleeing the Red Army takeover of Eastern Europe. It was Russian ballerinas. I mean, to exaggerate a little, but not that much. That's what it was about. And Soviet Union didn't let people out. And so there just weren't that many people that you would apply asylum to. Now, there's no more Soviet Union. It's air travel is cheap. Everybody's got a cell phone. And so it's just become a ploy to enter developed countries. Our country, Europe, Israel, Australia, whatever.
It's subversive. You say ploy, and that's exactly what it is. It's a feigned asylum. Everybody knows, I think even in Europe, that most people claiming asylum are not fleeing some danger. They're just fleeing their country because they want a new start, a different place. So it's economic. When I think about asylum, now that you had clarified that for me in something previously that I saw of yours, it made sense to me, because I remember in the old days that, like you said, a ballerina or an Olympic athlete or maybe a former KGB guy, he'd come in to the United States legally. He was here legally, and he would somehow get over to the embassy or I don't know, State Department, whatever, and say, I need asylum. And you see this in movies, especially old movies all the time in Soviet era.
Moscow on the Hudson, if you remember that Williams movie.
Exactly.
And those people are here legally and then apply for asylum. That's called affirmative asylum. And that still happens. But the main thing that I was talking about, and this is the main problem, is what's called defensive asylum claim, in our law anyway. What that means is you're inadmissible. You entered illegally, but you say, please don't deport me. Here's why you shouldn't deport me, because I'm making an asylum.
I've been following refugee resettlement for decades now, and it's pretty horrifying how it's ended up happening. I don't know that in the past, in the 50s and 60s, how it was being dealt with before these great cataclysmic changes, but I started noticing that they would get refugees, and there was this thing called refugee resettlement, and it was a thing, right? Refugee resettlement. It just sounded like a package, and suddenly, 4,000 Somalis would be put into some little tiny town that used to be an all-American, small-town America little place with its own culture and history going back decades or hundreds of years, and suddenly it was as if they were transported to another world, the Americans that lived there formerly or still did. So refugee resettlement became a big deal when? When did the change come where they started proactively going after these populations?
It was it became kind of formalized and systematized after the fall of Indochina. That was what really started. There was refugee resettlement before that, as you suggested, in the 50s and 60s. But back then, it was kind of a one-off thing, and there would be, say, some parish in Iowa would, want to sponsor a family that fled Poland. And so it was a kind of sacrificial charity. They took those people in. You give the dad a job as a janitor, in the church or whatever, and the ladies' guild gets together and help the mom get on her feet, that kind of stuff. And so it was a direct kind of person-to-person sort of adoption of an individual or a family by an American church or college or something. Sure. Right.
In that circumstance, that if I were being sponsored coming out of a hellhole someplace, and one family took responsibility for me or a parish, as you said, I would have this warm affection toward them. But it's become populations, masses of numbers, and it's not even voluntary, because all these little towns that you heard about, and this goes way back before they're eating the cats, they're eating the dogs. I can't remember the name of that city in Ohio. This goes back decades, that people found that, suddenly there are 4,000 new people there, and they're looking around, they say, how did this happen? Who said yes? Who says yes to this? Does the federal government or the state or the county?
The federal government. It's the State Department working with these contractors, Catholic Charities, Lutheran Immigration Services, Episcopal Migration Services, Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, World Relief. So they're not all religious organizations, but most of them are. And this system came into creation after the fall of Vietnam, because there were a large number of people fleeing Vietnam. And so that started it, but now it's become this kind of, it's taken on a life of its own. And to contrast with, this congregation adopting a family, say, now these government contractors, like Catholic Charities and the Lutherans and Episcopalians, evangelicals, everybody's got them. They have local affiliates, and they're only responsible for the people they bring in for 3 months. And the point is, after that, they sign them up for wealth, and they make money by the head. By the more people come in, the more money they get paid by the State Department. And so
these so-called charities, these Christian charities,
it's not charity. It's government-funded contract.
There's no cost to their efforts. There's no hardship. And when you walk away after 3 months, if there's lonely people, jobless people, People that are having trouble assimilating, language problems, religious issues, whatever it is, they're out of there. I got them in. I got my commission. I'll get you on welfare. I'm gone. I get you in a place to live on the taxpayer dime, and now I'm gone.
And the thing is, there isn't the accountability even, and I mean even from the refugees themselves, because like you were saying, some family from Poland comes in the 50s. Yes, the church that's sponsoring them, reaches out to them and has a relationship with them, but they also kind of hold them accountable for their behavior, because people are people, and you know what I mean? You can't, it's like if their kids start misbehaving, well, you kind of, I won't say it's sort of you owe us, but there is a kind of personal relationship there. That doesn't happen now. There isn't any such thing. I mean, there are individuals who want to help at the local level, help the refugees and all that. I get all that. But when you turn it into a welfare program, which is basically what it is, you cut that personal responsibility and accountability cut, whether it's regular welfare for Americans or a kind of refugee system, which is itself a kind of welfare. So, it's a terrible way to run things. And I've got other critiques of it. I think it's actually morally dubious to even be taking large numbers of refugees.
I do too. Tell me more about what you think.
Yeah, this is an argument people don't really think about, and then when you bring it up, it makes sense. We spend a lot of money on refugee resettlement. Whatever, we're going to spend a lot of money however we run it properly. What we're doing, though, is spending a large amount of money on a handful of people instead of spending the same amount of money on a much larger group of people back where they are to begin with. For instance, we actually crunched the numbers on this, and we found that it costs 12 times as much to take care of to bring a refugee here as it does to take care of them in the country where they've sought their initial asylum, their initial protection. For instance, and specifically, we were looking at Syrians in the Middle East compared to Middle Eastern refugees generally. Usually it's Syrians and Turkey, that kind of thing. And then what's the cost of bringing them here? 12 times more. I mean, it's immoral to resettle people who don't have an emergency, immediate need to be resettled, because what that means is we're spending 12 times the amount of money. The analogy I use is you got 12 people floundering in the water, and instead of throwing each of them a life preserver, which isn't great, but at least you don't drown, we're sending a yacht that only carries one person, and the rest of them are basically out of luck. That's just
right. And by the way, the yacht has more crew, and they've got all this arrangement, and they have time to get there, and you could have just saved them all by now. That is a great moral. It's not morally dubious; it is morally bankrupt. And I've seen these kinds of things. When we look, of course, at USAID. Where there are things that we could do to help in a foreign nation, and specifically, I think, first and foremost, of digging them a well. You can dig a well for $300 or $400 a hand. Well, Israelis are putting in electronic ones that are monitored from Israel, so they know if there's a moment that there's a problem with it and it can be resolved. I mean, it's a brilliant way to bring life and hope and an upping of the prosperity and the the quality of life to a community. 400 or 500, 3,000 or 4,000, I don't know how many, but this is on the cheap. It's real, and you can stamp it with the American flag. You can, and say, take an American there and hug these people. They're real. You dug that well, and you go home. They have good things. But instead, we send hundreds of millions, sometimes billions, to dictators and autocrats, and they drive around in their Ferraris and their limousines and all the rest. And it's just really subverting everything that we're supposed to be for. And this is a great example of it.
Absolutely. I mean, it's and you know, you could say we spend whatever the amount of money is on refugee protection. It's always going to be limited. So whatever it is, we need to spend it in the way that it's going to get the most bang for the buck. You could devote, all of that money to improving, say, conditions in a, refugee camp in Turkey or in Bangladesh or something else. And the same money helps dramatically more people. Whatever it is you do with it, you improve the water, like you said, improve or hire extra 2 teachers for the little school in the refugee, whatever it is, it's going to do a lot more good.
It's financial profligacy. So there's got to be more to this. I think what you're telling me is, let's go back to these NGOs again, because we all know NGOs are at the center of evil in almost everything that happens. A spigot of dollars is turned on. It just keeps going. And they're actually devastating in America, our sovereignty, everything. So these NGOs, non-governmental organizations, usually have the moniker of humanitarian and a Christian denomination, some kind of religious denomination. And then they set up a deal with the feds to get money when they coordinate or organize this transfer, this refugee resettlement. Who is finding first? Do they go to the federal government, to the State Department or something and say, look, there's 3,000 people in Somalia in this village and we need to get them out. They need to be refugees.
It's usually the State Department working with the UN, and it's the UN High Commissioner for Refugees that identifies people who are refugees and then says, okay, the subset of them are in need of resettlement. And I got to say, they actually say they have a priority list for resettlement where they have most of them are kind of, they think they could use resettlement. And then there's a smaller group they call urgently in need of resettlement. And then there's the smallest group who are emergency cases. That's who we should be taking. That's some years, 7,000 people in a whole year, maybe 10. You know what I mean? It's a small number of people. Now, if we started taking only emergency cases from the UN, they'd probably start classifying more of them as emergency cases just to aim. But the interesting thing about what you're talking about is that under Biden, they actually developed a system which has been totally, unplugged on January 20th, where the groups you're talking about, the NGOs and others, would be able to pick their own refugees. Whether they're refugees or not, according to the UN definition, they would just be able. Now, the State Department would have to, screen and decide whether to let them in or not.
Oh, yeah, the State Department, that's a trustworthy source under Biden.
Yeah, exactly. So it was called the Welcome Corps. And in fact, the Corps is in like Marine Corps, the Welcome Corps.
Oh.
And in fact, they had the Welcome Corps on campus where universities were going to be able to sponsor their own refugee. I don't mean, here's somebody, would you be willing to sponsor them? I mean, hey, there's this guy in Gaza and we'd love to move him here. Can we bring him? And I mean, it was bonkers.
Has that been turned off?
On Inauguration Day, they stopped the whole thing. So yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was a complete, and there was Welcome Corps at Work, I think they called it, where businesses would be able to pick their own, essentially,
but they're never going to be responsible.
Yeah.
This is called official, very expensive virtue signaling. You put the picture of your African refugees or Syrian refugees on the wall, in the break room or something, and you come, they visit once, or you send a welcome package at Christmas every year or something. Well,
absolutely.
That is, so refugee resettlement is, under normal circumstances, would be initiated by the UN reaching out to the United States. They have this 3-tier system, and the United States, whoever's in office at that point, will decide on some criteria. Do we have a criteria for refugee resettlement?
We have what is called, the State Department runs this. They have a priority list of who's, most urgently to be let in. And it includes relatives of earlier refugees. So they have like a P1, P2, P3, and this is how and they also, there are certain national groups, I'm not sure, I forget who's on the list now, where if you're from that country, you're automatically considered a refugee, whether you individually experience any persecution or not. So that's either P2 or P3. I forget. I mean, it's but the point is there is a system for it. But
it's
the
broken.
State Department. It's not even broken. It's misconceived from the scratch. And the State Department has always, one of the weaknesses has been, and this seems to be, Secretary Rubio is working to change this, obviously, but it's always been that they see the foreigners, foreign countries or foreign individuals, as their customers rather than American people. And so that translates into all kinds of areas, but refugee resettlement in particular, they see their job as serving refugees as the customer, as opposed to promoting the well-being and interests of the American people.
Now, with refugees, which you explained was that refugees and asylees, the difference is geography, location. The refugees in Somalia or Syria, wherever, and we proactively make a sovereign decision, ill-advised or not, to reach out to them or to agree to the UN's request. Then do they choose an NGO to facilitate it normally?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, I'm not sure how they match up the refugee to the contract.
And these NGOs, there's all there are all kinds of Christian and religious organizations out there that actually get money from the congregations or their denomination. And they say this, so everybody, has missions Sunday or something once a year. And everybody gives their, envelope to their missions programs. And they have particular missionaries. But what we've done, just like when the government started creating a welfare state, the very things that Americans and just Christians, I'm using Christians for a particular reason, because that's really where most of this was galvanized around, Judeo-Christian groups, that they were doing what we do as a government today, even when it comes to things in nations. I remember during World War II and afterwards in Israel, that there would just be these organizations that get together. They pennies would be given in the organizations, dollars, to help these people that got hit by an earthquake in Israel in 1948 or something. And it was again very personal. The government hadn't taken control of it. When the government entered in as the official charity dispenser, then of course charity it shriveled up.
It crowded out.
That's
right.
Exactly right. Because why? I know the government's going out and getting refugees. I don't even pay attention anymore, right? Whereas Americans would have read the New York Times in the old days and known about that. So these NGOs are putting on steroids that philosophy that I'm a Christian organization, so-called, and I'm going to get a commission on every refugee I bring it in. It's no longer Christian charity. We're the professional Christian arm of a government agency, and we get paid per each. And that is one of the ugliest stories I've seen.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, we one of our board members published an op-ed recently on the Episcopal Migration Services, which is the Episcopal Church version of this. And they are the ones that actually put up the least of their own money into this, because there is, a lot of these religious organizations do put up some of their money. It's just that most of it comes from the taxpayer. But for Episcopal Migration Services, it's something like 97.5% is government money. I mean, this is not charity. Charity is sacrificial. It's that you give up doing something so that you can take the money you would have used for that and do it for something else. I mean, I'm a deacon actually at my parish in the Armenian Church in D.C. And you give money for stuff. You know what I mean? We're not getting grants from the government. If you're going to build something or renovate something or go and help some family, it's like, well, you all have to pitch in and come up with the money. And we have an endowment fund so that we sort of try to build up a nest egg so the income from that can go and help the parish. That's the way charity works. This isn't charity.
This is not charity. And what it does,
arms with the government.
The government actually indirectly, in a sense, but very directly, becomes the change agent of religion. We acquiesce. I mean, like we really have no choice in the matter. We really don't. But mentally, well, this goes out through the minds and hearts, and you see it on news, and you watch podcasts, whatever, and you see these things happening, and it becomes part of the culture. You didn't even notice that you made a shift in your mind from this is what a Christian should be doing, and this is now what the government does. But then what we also do is we take out the will of the people, which I want to get back to after we talk about asylees. But as far as the refugees are concerned, I would suspect that you think that we need to overhaul this entirely. How would you overhaul just the refugees? Forget asylees for a moment. Refugees.
This is in fact what the State Department's looking at now, because on Inauguration Day they halted all refugee resettlement, and for a 90-day period to, look at the whole thing from bottom up, and they may extend that pause. And so the first thing we need to do is refugee resettlement. In fact, I would say the most important thing is refugee resettlement needs to be limited to emergency cases. People who can't stay where they are one moment longer and have absolutely nowhere else to go. There just aren't that many people like that in the world. Obviously, a lot of the people that we have been bringing in as refugees, I mean, their lifestyle improves. Certainly does. Of course it does. But that's, bringing in refugees is a kind of, you need to be especially a person in unique circumstances to warrant refugee resettlement. And there just aren't that many people like that. And there shouldn't be we shouldn't be using it as a kind of foreign policy, because that's something I didn't about. The State Department often will say, okay, well, there's this group of people, a minority group in a country, and, it's causing problems for the country they're in, and the country they're from doesn't want them back either. So we'll just move them all to St. Louis instead. I mean, it's just, there was a group, for instance, the Somali Bantu. These are in Somalia, but they're not ethnic Somalis. They're the descendants of slaves that the Arabs kidnapped from further south in Africa. So totally different, not just different ethnic group, almost like a different race. In other words, they're all black, but it's like, I don't know, for Indians versus Icelandic, that kind of difference. And these are the descendants of these slaves. And they're still considered subhuman by the Somalis. They hate their guts. So a bunch of them were, became refugees. And Somalia said, we don't want them back. We hate these people. Well, their ancestors were kidnapped by Arab slavers from what is now Mozambique and Tanzania. And the governments of those countries said, well, we'll take back our long lost, cousins. We're going to need some money to resettle. We can set up villages for them. We're going to have to dig wells, pools. Yeah. You know what we did? We said, nah, forget that. We'll just move them to the United States. And we've done this kind of thing a number of times. There are Nepalis, people ethnically Nepali, who are in Bhutan. This is in the Himalayas to India. And the Bhutanese don't want them around. Nepal doesn't want them back. And frankly, India is the local hegemon, the big country. And they're like, yeah, what do we care? So we just moved them to Pittsburgh. And it's this idea that, we'll just kind of throw this problem over our shoulder back into America land, and that'll make it go away.
Everything's okay then. Everything's okay.
Yep.
So India, they could absorb actually millions of people and no one would even notice because they have 1.45 billion people. The Nepalis, the Nepalis, the Indians, the Bhutans, they're all of, and the Pakistanis and the Bangladeshis are all of the same root stock. So they got separated. I mean, but they're all
they don't like each other. Let's face it.
None of them like each other. Yeah. But so we bring them here. What decade did the Somali Bantus and the Nepalis come in? Do you remember?
The people from Bhutan, they call them Bhutanese, even though they're Nepali ethnically. This was, it was like the 90s or the early 2000s. We've written on both of those things.
Yeah,
we have in other articles of ours. If you go on our website, search Somali Bantu.
This is a problem because you know what? Those people aren't going to assimilate and feel as comfortable. You could have moved them, 500 miles down the road, new protections from, but this is where often countries that we have dealings with, like India, we have a great deal of dealings with India. And what we should be saying to the Indians is, you will take them because they're really your people, your cousins, and these people need to be cared for on your continent.
And they're from your region. You're the big kahuna in your region. It's your job. Why would we move them to the other side of the world? It's crazy.
This needs to be, now, when a refugee is resettled, and I don't know how this is, and then we're going to go into asylees next. When a refugee is settled, have we made certain legal promises to them?
Oh, yeah. They can get a green card in 1 year after arrival, which is to say a green card means they become a regular immigrant, a lawful permanent resident. And then 4 years after that, they can apply for citizenship because usually it's 5 years, but we count the 5 years from when they arrive in the United States. And, they get a green card after a year, citizenship after 4 years. They have to apply for it. Some of them
But it's a rubber stamp at this point, unless they murdered the family next door or something. It's a rubber
stamp. Even if they have, we have a database on our website at cis.org of vetting failures of people who were supposed to be vetted. Some of them brought in as refugees, others in other ways, who turned out to be bad guys, and the vetting should have caught it, and it didn't. Even people who ended up, there was people ended up being mass murderers, terrorists, war criminals, whatever it is. They slipped through the system anyway, and some of those people were in fact admitted as refugees. In fact, we added a case recently of a Bosnian Muslim who was a war criminal. During the wars there in Yugoslavia, he had been a camp guard and tortured Serbs and other people, and ugly stuff. Wouldn't have been hard to find out if they'd actually expended a little effort in vetting this person. And so the point is, all of these assurances that you get about how people are being vetted, whether they're refugees or anything else, I'm not saying anybody's lying, but, there's
sloppy
vetting.
Negligence. This is my country, my birthright, and I don't accept their negligence. I don't. No. There's one thing about the Somalis, because religion always is a huge component to all of this. The Somali Bantus, were they Muslims?
Yeah, they're all Muslim. They're all Muslim too. Yeah.
So they're Muslim too.
Yeah.
All right.
They're not culturally that different, but they're ethnically kind of racially different. And so the Somalis, literally, you have Somalis here, Ilhan Omar talking about how bad racism is back in their own country. They're racist toward these people that their ancestors enslaved a couple hundred years ago.
A black person is a Muslim, but they consider these guys dogs, basically.
They're totally, but they are ethnically very different. They're even phenotypically different because the Bantus are people who originally they came from what is now Cameroon and then over hundreds of years spread over all of Central and Southern Africa. The Somalis are Hamitic who come from, northeastern Africa. Anyway, they're totally different ethnically. They have no real relation.
Let me ask you this question. You probably saw on X that 70 people, including women and children, were beheaded, I think, in a church.
Yeah, I don't know if it was Eastern early this Congo.
Yeah, in Congo.
Yeah, Eastern Congo. I saw that.
And it just ticks me off so badly. This is called genocide. It was, by the way, and I'm no slight to X, but I looked over in the column where it mentioned 70 people being beheaded, and it was categorized under crime. And I'm thinking, that should be jihad, or it should be crimes against humanity, but it's not an intentional thing there. So I'm looking at that, and probably what comes to America's minds all the time, especially for those of the Judeo-Christian faith, the idea of moving, say, in Syria, from Syria, or in Africa, or anywhere else in the Middle East and North Africa, particularly, refugees or asylees, whether they're really that or not, who are Muslim, and we are taking them in from a Muslim nation surrounded by hundreds of millions of Muslims and Muslim nations, and we're bringing them over to a Christian country or Judeo-Christian country where I suspect that, for instance, these Congolese Christians who just got beheaded because they're Christians, we don't even think about that. So we're taking in Muslims from a place where they should not be. They could have just gone to Turkey or to Jordan or to Lebanon or wherever else, but we bring them here. But we leave the little Congolese in their village to be slaughtered, raped, enslaved. What is the State Department's? Is there any law? Is there any guideline, regulation, anything that discusses that bizarre, well, what I call bizarre, but that kind of a policy decision where we leave the Christians that are being persecuted, but we bring Muslims out of Muslim nations? I don't know what that's called.
It's a good question. And historically, we have not prioritized the resettlement of Christians from the Middle East, for instance. In other words, it would be discriminatory to, approach it that way. That's kind of the way we've thought about it. But what we need is a basic policy change that says if there's going to be resettlement, it should be in the region where the people are from. In other words, regional resettlement, not moving people to Europe or to the United States or Australia. And there's a lot of that. There is a lot of that. There are a lot of refugees who are, displaced in the area, in the country next door to where they come from, that sort of thing. There's no question. There is a lot of them. But resettlement in a place thousands of miles away needs to be exclusively for special emergency cases and no one else.
Agreed. But to hone in on one point, because nobody likes to talk about these things, so I want to talk about it. This idea of religion, that if we favor one religion in immigration over another, that there's something morally wrong with that. It makes everybody uncomfortable to discuss it. And I think that we need to break a barrier, at least to discuss it. Maybe the debate ends up one direction or the other, or one side or the other. But the reality is, this is an issue. Those Yazidi girls, women who were burned alive because they wouldn't convert and have sex with their new slave master who considered them his sex slave. Watching those women being burned alive and knowing that, I don't think the State Department at the time said, stop ISIS, we're coming to get these Yazidis. All of the ones that you kidnapped, turn them on over. We want them, we'll take them here. This would be a group and a culture that would be so affirmatively grateful, and you're actually saving their lives. I mean, imagine people being burned alive. And that's happened. The stories, we won't go into any more of the stories, it's just too horrific. But don't you think that we should consider that? Given that, like, for instance, in many of these Muslim nations, a Christian couldn't immigrate there and become a citizen.
Right. Yep. I mean, a Christian is a second-class citizen, even the ones who were born, for the most part. But even for these, persecuted minorities, like the Yazidis, who aren't Christian, but they're not Muslim either. It's sort of they're Kurds, they're Kurdish speaking. I've actually met some of them when I was a student in Armenia in the 1980s. That's the one place in the world where, until the Kurdish region was established in Iraq, where they now have their own government, Armenia was the freest place in the world for Kurds, because they had their own radio station and their own all of that stuff. And there's Yezdis in Armenian, you call them. But my point is, even in that case, we should be working for regional resettlement. But yeah, absolutely. And see, the thing is, it's interesting. We're taking Muslim refugees from Muslim countries, Muslim majority countries, but then the same activist groups insist that we take the Rohingya, who are a Muslim minority persecuted in Burma. So we're supposed to take Muslims, whether they're a minority Muslims or whether they come from a majority country.
But the Assyrians, now I don't want to empty Egypt of her Copts, COPTS. That's
right.
But I do, because there's still 10%. They're horribly treated there, but 10%. That's the biggest, probably, minority that I know of. Maybe I'm wrong on that.
The biggest remaining Christian population in the Middle East.
And so the Muslims are denuding from Islamic countries in the Middle East of all Christian. We know that's a fact.
That's been going on for 1,400 years, honestly.
Right, well, that's true.
My own grandparents dealt with that, obviously, so.
Yes, exactly. I mean, so you've got these Assyrians, and I don't know if there's Assyrians, Chaldeans, and then, of course, Armenians, there's Yazidi.
It's complicated. There's like four different flavors of Assyrian Christians.
Yeah,
Chaldeans,
exactly.
It's no point to going into it, but yes,
exactly.
There's a lot of.
But so you've got these. There are minorities there. They are considered Muslim nations, but there are people that are living under horrific persecution, and we're not reaching our hand out to them, because the only reason I say this about the Middle East is, none of these countries ever have the hope of being a Christian majority. And as a minority, they're subjugates, they're peons, they're not even second-class citizens. They're considered lower than that. And so in Lebanon, I still someday have hope that they may be able to get their diaspora back and they become that Christian country they once were, or Christian majority. But I think that we should have our hands open to Christians in the Middle East and bring them out if they need be. Anyway, so we know that then the bottom line is no, you did not answer one question. This is really important. We got to the point where the UN to the State Department and somehow the NGOs get wrapped up in this to get their bakshish. And then these 3,200, whatever it is, refugees to be resettled end up in small town Iowa, right? Now, you tell me, Mark Krikorian, how did they get to Iowa? Did the mayor of small town invite them in? Or is this a bunch of that back room dealing with like rental units and
it's
money changing?
It's a combination. The big contractors that work with the State Department have subcontractors. And so they'll have a local group in, say, this Iowa town that's a refugee group that's paid by the big NGO, which gets its money from the State Department. And so there's supposed to be, according to the law, consultation with the local communities before people are sent there. But consultation amounts to you send them a letter and say, we're moving people into your town and, have a nice day.
And they've arranged the housing with landlords, and all of that's already done.
It works differently in different places, but yes, the local subcontractors will find people where to live. Often they end up putting them in places that are, have cheap rent. And so sometimes they're places there's a lot of crime involved. It depends if it's in a big city. Other times, some of these local subcontractors work with, for instance, meatpacking plant to provide a pipeline of workers who really don't have anywhere else to go. They don't know, they just got dropped into this, meatpacking town in Iowa, and they're funneled into these jobs working in meatpacking plants, for instance, so that it kind of becomes...
It's like a cartel. It's almost like trafficking.
It is kind of like trafficking, honestly. I mean,
right. It seems to me it's like
kind of sleazy.
It's very sleazy. And what I also found when I'm sorry, what is the name of the town? Is it Springfield, Ohio?
No, was it Springfield, Ohio? Yeah, I forget. Yes, I think so.
Yeah. And so the eating the cats are eating the dogs. That's the song that never goes away.
Yeah.
Anyway, I did a lot of research at the time and realized that what was happening is there were like kings there in this area, this town or this county, and they would have mansions, and they worked deals with property owners. Property prices to rent rooms or homes would skyrocket because they would take hundreds and hundreds of houses, fill maybe 10 immigrants to a house. They're getting this huge amount of rent because the immigrant has to pay them, and then they're paying the rent to the landlord. And there's a whole, it's organized crime. I'm going to call it that. That's my judgment of it. And so do you think that this is going to be, when the State Department is shaking this all out, do you think that they're going to go all the way down to that local level where the mayor and the city council and the people have had no choice and break this up?
Well, they don't really have to, because if you dry up the flow, then that goes away. You know what I mean? In other words, if you admit small numbers of people, not like whole ethnic groups, again, you dry up the flow, that goes away. And the other thing is, and this is something the Trump administration the first time tried to do, was give governors of states the ability to just say, no, we're not going to participate in refugee resettlement. So give them kind of a veto over it. I forget whether it ended up in the courts, and some of the Republican states said that's fine. In other words, that the State Department wouldn't be directing people there if you didn't want them to.
I've been told that the Laken-Riley Act, that certain provisions in there allow the states to say this is causing economic harm. It doesn't say what kind of harm or to whom or how much something. I haven't read the act.
But that's not for refugee resettlement. That's if the federal government releases somebody from detention, an alien.
Okay, so it's not related to refugees.
Against the law, the states could then sue. So it's not a refugee thing, although it's an important change, but it's not about refugees.
Okay, let's go to asylums, because we've learned that they are very different, and they're no longer ballerinas and chess masters and KGB spy masters. I'm going to watch a movie tonight about all that. And now the asylees, lay that out for us again. How is it that, and maybe this is where you bring in the law, 1951, 1967, and how that all happened, and then where it morphed.
1951 was the UN convention called the Convention Relating to the Status of Refugees. In some countries, they just refer to refugees, whether they're what we would call asylees or refugees. In other words, they sometimes just use the same term for both. So the UN treaty basically does that too. And
so they conflated refugees and asylees in the language.
Because you measure them the same way. They just don't make the geographical distinction that our law makes, which is an important distinction because, as I said at the beginning, one is a sovereign act of the government, the other is not.
Right.
And then in 1967, they expanded that treaty, which applied only to Europe. They expanded it to the whole world. And
that was the protocol.
It's the protocol, exactly. And that's what we signed. Truman actually didn't sign the original convention because he said, we're not going to restrict American sovereignty that way.
Not bad for a hat maker. I got to tell
exactly.
you. And then,
I mean, he was, in a lot of ways, he was an obnoxious guy and he was a real partisan Democrat, but he was a patriotic American. I mean, let's face it.
Yeah.
They could use this. His party could use a couple more Trumans, quite honestly. But anyway,
in 67,
so
LBJ, was this go ahead, tell me the story.
Yeah, LBJ signed it. The Senate confirmed it, ratified the treaty. And this is, in a sense, it's an object lesson in how things can change. Because in 1967, 68, how many asylum seekers were there? There weren't any. It was like, well, this is what harm could it do? And this is one of those roads to hell is paved with good intentions. You know what I mean? So,
yes.
Basically, nothing happened even after we signed it until Congress passed the 1980 Refugee Act, which basically put the provisions of that treaty into American law. And so, frankly, in my opinion, the first step to fixing, especially the asylum thing, is to withdraw from the UN Refugee Treaty. You can withdraw from a treaty at any time. That's the whole, every treaty has a provision. I think we have to give 12 months notice and just withdraw from it. Now, we still have to change our own law, the 1980 Refugee Act, but the first step really has to be, in my opinion, withdraw from the Refugee Treaty. Because
is there only one treaty that treats this that we have to withdraw
there's
from?
one overarching treaty. There's also something called the Convention, the Torture Convention, which is supposedly outlaws torture. I think a lot of people in much of the world haven't noticed that it's been outlawed, quite frankly.
Like outlawing hate.
Yeah. Well, it's all follows on a 1920s treaty called the Kellogg-Briand Pact that outlawed war. War is illegal, just in case, it's a complete farce. And that actually underlines the point I'm trying to make, which is that if we make a treaty with a peer country, with Canada or Japan or, Italy or Israel, that's an agreement and it's like a contract and whatever, you deal with it. These treaties where all the countries of the world sign on to, they're meaningless. Does anybody think that communist China, which is they signed the refugee treaty, it honors it? Does anybody think that Saudi Arabia
or Somalia
honors the torture
Somalia is
convention?
going to start taking in refugees, right?
Yeah, it's crazy. And the reason I even bring up the torture convention is that it has a provision in it that says if a person is likely to be tortured if returned, we're not allowed to return him and he gets to stay whether we like it or not. And so we would have to basically overhaul the whole process of protection, basically. And in my opinion, no one who makes their way through the Mexican border or who flew here from a European airport should even be allowed to apply for asylum or protection of any kind, because why didn't they do it in the first country they got to? Because the Refugee Treaty, the Convention and the Protocol say, and we did not incorporate this into our law, we should have, say that a country can't deny someone refugee status or asylum. Asylum is what in our terminology, just because they're an illegal alien. But it says, provided that they came directly from the country where they were being persecuted. We are under... No, it's not. That's in the treaty. Our law is actually more expansive than the treaty. Because people who pass through Mexico, why are we allowing them to apply for asylum at all? Mexico has its own asylum law. They have an agency that deals with that. COMAR is the abbreviation, the name of it. It's their Commission on Refugees or whatever it is. And they even have a video on their website, how to apply for asylum in Mexico. So if they're bypassing all of them and heading to the Rio Grande and then saying they want asylum, they're not asylum seekers.
And let's just, just envision everybody who's listening to this. And if you are a refugee, you're being tortured or abused or whatever, a political prisoner, you get out, or asylee, you're going to be an asylee, and you get out of this country that you were born and raised in, and you cross the border into a freer country where you can claim or ask for asylum. The whole goal was, when you're faced with this horrific torture, imprisonment, maybe even death, your whole goal is to not be tortured and be imprisoned politically or face death, so you get out. Now, what they've made it is, okay, well, let me just figure which European country or which English-speaking country I would prefer to go to. Let's look at their GDP and their welfare system. That's not a refugee, because when you're a refugee or an asylee, you're scared. And you'll take what you get.
You're going to take anything you get. You're going to, literally, and the first place that you land that you're not being persecuted, you're now not, you're now away from. So
you're free.
And now look, some people will say, well, it's unfair. The United States is far away from that. Well, geography is a harsh mistress. We have oceans on either side of us, Canada to the north and Mexico to the south. And that's a fortunate thing for us. I'm happy to help other countries bear the burden of refugees who have, come into their countries, if that's in our foreign policy interest. But, you don't just get to say, I have a brother in Milwaukee, and so I want to have asylum there instead of the 9 other countries that I'm going to pass through on the way to the United States. Sorry, that's not, you don't get asylum. You shouldn't get asylum, but unfortunately, under our law now, you can't.
Well, I did a little experiment last night. I was spending hours on this. And what I decided to do is, since the ultimate goal, obviously, of the United Nations is to move all third world people into the first world, because frankly, it's not fair that they don't have what we have, and it has nothing to do with, history and rule of law and the religion and everything else. So it's our fault, or even if it's not our fault, we don't deserve to be the only ones. So we'll move the entire third world, everybody else in the country, to 49 countries. So I did a lot of this and do it proportionally. So we're at 345 million right now. If we proportionally take in our share of the world, we would be at 2,328 million or more if we take our fair share into the world. So I say this absurdity because the reality is this whole thing, it's a drop in the bucket. So you bring this person, he's not really a refugee, he's not really an asylee. You bring him in here, or thousands, but it doesn't change. And this is where we go to the moral aspect that you brought up earlier, and that haunts me too. We brain drain the top guys because they're going to get out. So we take in some impoverished, unfree, corrupt country, the creme de la creme that they're not better than our creme de la creme, but they're the best that they have. They leave because they can get out and get asylum or refugee status somewhere. This helps this country not at all. It actually hurts them. And then when you bring big groups of refugees, you have why haven't you brought the whole country? Because basically, if these people are all under this, at least 50% of them are probably refugees potential as well. So just empty the country out. It doesn't make sense. Let's fix what's there. That's the moral choice. So with asylees, is this baked into our law, this 1980 law?
Yeah,
and
it is.
Who came up with this?
I don't know. It was Jimmy Carter signed it, but it was. But again, it was 1980. Remember, this was seen as a way of dealing with the fallout from the fall of Vietnam.
Yeah,
because remember that happened only 5 years before that. And the refugees started coming out right away, but the flow went on for a number of years. And, the Soviet Union was going to be around forever and keeping people from escaping. And, China was too poor for anybody to leave. And so, in other words, it was a whole different.
Really?
And we don't live in that world anymore. And, when conditions change, you need to change the rules.
Well, 1980 for immigration, that's a long time to leave something on the books.
I mean, absolutely.
That's bad news. Now, these asylees, you're saying that they're the same. It's just the geography. So if we actually, of these millions of people that have come in over the last 4 years or more, as they're being trained to go and say, oh, but I'm an asylee because they would be mean to me if I go home. This is happening in UK all the time. Like somebody rapes a girl and he says, they let him off and they say, well, we can't send him back. He's been convicted, but we can't send him back to where he's from because it would, have emotional harm to him, the rapist. So they claim asylum status. And if we flip the switch or tick the box, does that mean it's 1 year to green card, 4 years to citizenship?
Yep. For asylees, too, it's the same thing. They can get a green card after 1 year and then citizenship after 4 more years.
Okay.
So, yep.
I don't know what the population is in America today, especially given the last 4 years, of people who've been brought in technically, though falsely, as asylees. And by the way, isn't it true that somebody who came in just to work, to get a job, 5 years later could then claim asylum status when he gets caught or if...
Oh, sure. That happens all the time.
So they permanently have that option to suddenly become an asylum.
Well, you're supposed to claim asylum within a year of entering the United States.
So that's happening right now a lot.
Yeah,
probably.
but, I'm confident that this administration is enforcing that.
Yeah.
I'm not. And the thing is, the exception there is, well, if circumstances have changed, then that 1 year time limit won't apply to you. Well, then you get a lawyer.
So what's going to happen with the Syrians?
Have changed.
The big 2015 migrant crisis from Syria. I have not seen any, but I've seen just hints. But is there anything that's actually happening concrete where are Syrians leaving Turkey and Lebanon and Iraq and flowing back to their nation that is now no longer under Assad? And is that happening from Europe?
Some are. I mean, there's been some news reports. I have no idea how much of that there is.
Just curious.
Yeah. But, the real problem for Europe, for instance, and this is for us too to some degree, but it's worse for them. Even people who are turned down for asylum don't get sent. In other words, they go through the whole thing. They're turned down for asylum. And then, essentially our system, and this is, like I said, it's worse in Europe. They just kind of shrug and they say, oh, well. And so,
I've seen stories in just the last several months of women killed or raped or, horrific crimes, and the immigrant or the criminal is an asylee claimer who was denied asylum, and they're still there to rape and ravage. So in the United States today, there have got to be a lot of asylees that have already been handed their green card, their perm card, right? And can anything be done about these massive, I don't know what the number is, but this number of people that have been given that original perm card after being given asylum status, or is that just a done deal? There's no going back?
No, it's mostly a done deal. If they lied somewhere, in the process of, in other words, if they ended up, I don't know, if they were a war criminal or something and they lied and they got, a green card anyway, they can be stripped from that. But it's going to be only in special cases.
Special cases,
it's a pretty high bar to undoing.
A jihadi from Jordan or Egypt, then maybe we could strip them of their
legal permanent residence status. Otherwise, no. The thing is, though, a lot of the people that Biden let in, and under the Biden administration, our estimate is something like 8 to 9 million people were let in who had no right to be here. Most of them affirmatively admitted and released by the government, not people who snuck past the border. They were let in, they were released into the country on the kind of rationale that they're going to apply for asylum, even if they didn't. And most of them